I reluctantly left my in-laws' place, dreading the fact that I had to visit the person I really didn't want to see, my mother-in-law. She's the mother of my beloved spouse, but I just don't get along with her. As soon as we got to my in-laws' house, my daughter started crying, maybe sensing my discomfort. The more I tried to calm her down, the louder she wailed, almost as if she could feel my frustration. Then, unexpectedly, my nephew, the son of my brother-in-law, piped up. "Do you know why the baby's crying?" When my brother-in-law asked him, my nephew confidently replied, "Yes." Little did anyone know, that answer would later alter my destiny. My name's Willow, 29 years old. Ken and I have been married for 2 years, and we clicked from the start. We're more like best friends than anything else. Ken's mom, however, isn't a fan of our bond. She's made it clear, not directly, but through her actions, that she's not fond of me. Whenever we're alone, she makes sure to give me a hard time. It's like she's protecting her son, Ken, fiercely. When we visit her, she gets visibly uncomfortable when Ken and I chat. But it's only when we're alone that she unloads her disapproval. She doesn't hold back, saying hurtful things about how I shouldn't be affectionate with Ken in her presence because I'm not family like she is. She goes as far as wishing Ken would divorce me. It's all so harsh that I'm left speechless every time. It's tough realizing my mother-in-law harbors such strong negative feelings toward me. I really want to build a good relationship with her, but this situation isn't helping. I've kept it from Ken, thinking it might make things worse. Looking back, I should have discussed it with him and created some distance from his mom early on. But I was so desperate for her approval. Things got even more complicated 6 months into our marriage when my mother-in-law started obsessing over grandchildren. It was like she couldn't let it go. One day, out of the blue, she said, "Willow, I think our family needs a boy as the heir." Everyone, including Ken, froze. Ken, bless him, stood up for me, telling his mom it wasn't okay to pressure us like that. He reminded her that having a child is a blessing, not a race, and our timeline is our own. Even though Kyle and his wife had a baby early in their marriage, it doesn't mean we have to follow the same path. He kindly asked his mom not to interfere too much. Despite my husband's efforts, my mother-in-law remained unimpressed. I chose to ignore her occasional icy glares. Kyle, Ken's brother, had tied the knot 5 years back, and soon after, his wife got pregnant, giving birth to a son, Billy, who's turning 4 soon. Billy adores being around us, and I can see him grow every time we meet. But what's remarkable is that Billy's words have been like a lifeline for me more than once. It all began when Billy was just 2.5 and started talking. One day, as I was about to leave my in-laws' place, Billy piped up, "Auntie, you should take a different road when you go home." Surprised, I asked him why. He replied, "The usual way isn't good. Take a different road." So I followed his advice that day. My husband had been drinking, so I had to drive. As I drove home, Billy's words echoed in my mind, leading me to take a different route. The next day, I was shaken to the core when the news reported a major accident on the exact road I was supposed to take the day before. I dropped the mug I was holding in shock. When I recounted my conversation with Billy to my husband, he dismissed it as mere coincidence. But Billy's comments continued to unsettle me. He never showcased his abilities in front of my husband or mother-in-law. It made me wonder if he possessed some kind of magical powers. One day, I decided to confide in my brother-in-law, Kyle. "Kyle, can we talk about Billy?" I asked, noticing a flicker of understanding in his expression. He took my arm and led me away from the others, speaking in a hushed tone. "What's going on with Billy?" he asked. "Well, maybe it's just a coincidence, but Billy has saved my life a couple of times," I confessed. "Saved you?" Kyle's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Yeah, from accidents and other situations. I was thinking maybe Billy has some kind of special power," I explained. "I see. So you've noticed it too," Kyle nodded. "He usually only shows that side of him to me and my wife, but I guess he revealed it to you as well." As time passed, I learned that Billy had displayed his special abilities to my brother-in-law and his wife on several occasions. They didn't think much of it, as Billy had never made such comments to anyone outside the family. However, they understood the potential complications if Billy's power became public knowledge. So they made efforts to keep it hidden. I couldn't shake off my curiosity about why Billy was revealing his power to me as well. It had been almost a year since I first discovered it. Recently, I found out that I was pregnant, but the morning sickness made it hard for me to visit my in-laws frequently. I heard that my brother-in-law and his wife were planning to visit, and while I was eager to see them, I also felt relieved that I wouldn't have to face my mother-in-law during the last trimester of my pregnancy. As my morning sickness settled down, my belly grew, making daily life a bit more challenging. Going on maternity leave should be a time of preparation and anticipation, but for me, it came with a barrage of calls from my mother-in-law. Every day, without fail, she'd ring me up, demanding to know if I was taking the supplements she sent. I was already taking folic acid, which I bought myself, but she insisted I switch to the expensive ones she recommended from a mail-order site. Her concern wasn't just about the supplements, it was about the gender of the baby. She made it clear that she expected a boy, considering me a failure as a wife for not delivering what she deemed a satisfactory child. Personally, I didn't care about the baby's gender. All I wanted was a healthy child. But my mother-in-law was fixated on having her way, right down to the gender. Dealing with her pressure was mentally exhausting. When I eventually told her the baby was a girl, she was furious. From then on, her harassment escalated. She insisted I take the supplements she sent, bombarded me with books on preparing for a second child, when I hadn't even given birth to the first one yet, and continued her daily calls. Her words turned increasingly cruel, filled with heartless abuse. She called me a worthless wife, regretted allowing us to marry, and even suggested I divorce her son. It was relentless and deeply hurtful. After giving birth, I found myself worn out both physically and mentally, haunted by my mother-in-law's hurtful words. I couldn't bring myself to tell my husband how much they were affecting me. I didn't want to burden him. But more than that, I feared any backlash from my mother-in-law. Despite the daily battles with anxiety, I managed to bring a healthy baby girl into the world. She was so precious that her presence overshadowed any negativity from my mother-in-law. 1 month later, my husband drove me to my in-laws' house to introduce them to our daughter. Alongside my brother-in-law, his wife, and Billy, I hoped to see my father-in-law and reconnect with them after some time apart. As we approached their house, I felt a knot of apprehension. I dreaded facing my mother-in-law's words again, but more than fear, I was eager to reunite with the rest of the family. Yet, the closer we got, the harder it became for me to walk, anticipating what my mother-in-law might say this time. I couldn't shake off the worry about her potentially hurting my daughter as she grew older. That thought weighed heavily on my mind. Despite my reluctance, I made my way to my in-laws' house. Thankfully, it was my brother-in-law who greeted us, along with his family, who had arrived earlier. My mother-in-law was busy playing with Billy in the living room when she noticed us. Suddenly, my daughter started crying, seemingly out of nowhere. My husband was concerned, but my father-in-law tried to reassure us, chalking it up to the change in surroundings. I did my best to calm my daughter, but she wouldn't stop crying. My mother-in-law let out an irritated sigh and muttered, "This is why girls are trouble." In that moment, I felt a surge of anger like never before. No matter how much I loved her son, I couldn't forgive her for such a comment. Why did the baby's gender matter? She was safe and healthy. I resolved to endure the day and never return. Then Billy, who had been playing happily, suddenly spoke up. His words made me exchange a glance with my brother-in-law. Maybe he was using his power. When my brother-in-law casually asked why the baby was crying, Billy confidently responded, saying the baby felt sorry for me and wanted my mother-in-law to stop bullying me. My husband was taken aback, and everyone in the room turned to my mother-in-law, who seemed shaken and muttered something about Billy being strange. Billy boldly spoke up, revealing that Grandma had been mean to Auntie for a long time, even when the baby was still in Auntie's belly. The baby didn't like it at all. My husband, taking it seriously, asked Billy if it was true. Billy confirmed it and said the baby wished she could tell Daddy, but he's too nice. She wanted Daddy to help Mommy. My husband thanked Billy, realizing the truth. He gave Billy a gentle smile before turning to his mother, his expression changing. He didn't care about her excuses and confronted her, demanding the truth. She denied it, trying to make me cover for her. But in that moment, I remembered all the times she had treated me poorly. It was time to speak up. I looked my husband in the eye and confessed that his mother had been bullying me since we got married. I knew it, but I was scared to tell him. My husband hugged me and our daughter, then turned to his mother with a resolve I'd never seen before. He called her out for her behavior, saying he was disappointed and didn't even see her as a mother anymore. He demanded she stay out of our lives. His mother pleaded, but my husband didn't buy it. He saw through her excuses, knowing she bullied me because I took him from her and because our baby wasn't a boy. He made it clear that he didn't want her involved with us anymore. It was a tough moment, but I knew it was necessary for our family's well-being. Why does it matter if our grandchild is a girl? I interjected, refusing to accept my mother-in-law's selfish desires. My husband, Ken, made it clear that he would choose me over her any day. He didn't want to continue a family with someone like her. My mother-in-law pleaded with Ken, begging him not to cut her out of his life. But he stood firm, looking at her with disdain. He reiterated that he was cutting ties with her, just as he had said. It was a heartbreaking moment, but necessary for our family's peace and well-being. In response to my husband's decision, my father-in-law and brother-in-law also chose to cut ties with my mother-in-law. My father-in-law even forced her to divorce him and leave the family home. With no money or place to go, she had to return to her parents' house. However, there, she was treated more like a housekeeper than a family member. It seemed like karma had caught up with her, and she was getting what she deserved. Meanwhile, we continued to visit my father-in-law and brother-in-law, maintaining good relationships with them and their families. Billy's magical abilities seemed to fade over time, and he rarely mentioned them anymore. Some say that babies and animals can sense things adults can't, but whether that's true or not, Billy's words had undoubtedly saved my life. Thanks to him, I'm now living a happy life. One day, I hope to share Billy's story, including his mysterious power, with my daughter. He played a significant role in our lives, and I want her to know about the extraordinary impact he had. Your dad's gone, and this house is mine now since I'm his wife. My stepmom scolded me, sounding like I was a naughty kid. The funeral had just finished, leaving me feeling as heavy and gloomy as a stormy sky. Angry, I snapped back. This is my home from childhood. You should leave with all your affairs with younger guys, betraying Dad. You don't deserve to be called his wife. She just snorted and said, tough luck. I'm getting the house and $1 million from the estate. I'll give you a measly $50. I couldn't help but laugh, which annoyed her. When I showed her a document, her face turned pale. Can you read this? I asked. She went white, stuttering, no, it can't be true, right? I'm Kelly, a 29-year-old homemaker who also works part-time. My dad was a lawyer, pretty well known in his field. He started his own firm and put in long hours with a few colleagues. My mom passed away when I was young, so I don't remember much about her. Dad was always busy with work, so I was mostly raised by my grandmother, but I never felt lacking because of it. Grandma was always kind, and I had plenty of other supportive relationships. I sailed through high school without much trouble, but when I started university, things changed. A new woman entered our family, disrupting the dynamic. It had always been just Dad and me. This lady will be your mother from today. Try to get along, Dad suddenly announced. She was decked out in designer clothes from head to toe. Nice to meet you, Kelly. You can call me Mom, and we can go shopping together, she said brightly. She seemed like someone I could be friends with, but living with her as a mother was a different story. Our personalities clashed, and it was clear we weren't going to get along. I'm more of a homebody, enjoying my days off with a coffee and relaxation indoors. My stepmother, on the other hand, was always out and about, shopping or going to parties. We didn't exactly clash, but we tended to keep our distance from each other. The real trouble began after I graduated from university and got a job as an office worker. My workplace was a 20-minute train ride from home, so I decided to stick around at my parents' house for a while. My relationship with my stepmom stayed peaceful, so I saw no urgent reason to move out. About 6 months into my job, I found myself at a social gathering with my coworkers. I'm not big on drinking, but I couldn't skip out on this party since almost everyone from work was going. On the way home, walking through a busy street with a few colleagues heading the same way, I spotted someone familiar from behind. It was my stepmother. Wondering what she was doing there, I glanced next to her and saw a young man I didn't recognize walking beside her. If they were just walking together, I might have thought they were friends despite the age gap. I was taken aback when I saw my stepmother walking arm in arm with a young man. The intimate vibe between them made me catch my breath. A colleague noticed my reaction and asked what was wrong, but I just laughed it off, unable to confide in someone I barely knew about the possibility of my stepmother cheating. I quickly made an excuse to leave and followed them, easily blending into the busy downtown crowd. As they walked, my stepmother and the young man seemed comfortable with each other, chatting closely like a couple. After about 3 minutes, they glanced around cautiously before entering a building. It turned out to be a lodging facility, and the shock of the discovery made me feel sick. I left the area, feeling betrayed and angry. The next morning, when my stepmother returned home, slightly drunk from a night out, I confronted her. She sarcastically asked what was wrong, noting that I usually avoided her. I didn't hold back, telling her I saw her with the young man entering a hotel. Caught off guard, she tried to dismiss it, suggesting it might have been someone who looked like her. She challenged me to provide proof, putting me in a difficult spot because I had none. Despite knowing what I saw, I couldn't confront her without evidence. Even though I saw the truth with my own eyes, she easily brushed it off. "You're too naive, Kelly. Maybe it's because you come from a good family," she taunted. She accused me of wanting to kick her out of the house, but defiantly claimed she wouldn't leave until I could prove it. Frustrated by her dismissive attitude, I was determined to expose her infidelity. I scraped together all the money I could and hired a private investigator. After a week of investigation, the shocking truth came out. She was cheating with 3 different young men simultaneously. Armed with this evidence, I went to my father, who had always been distant due to his busy schedule. But he brushed me off, barely acknowledging my presence as he buried himself in his work. He even interrupted me when his phone rang, showing little concern for my troubles. It was a painful reminder of his neglect throughout my life. Feeling disillusioned and unsupported, I decided to leave, distancing myself from my father and stepmother. Living on my own for the first time was tough, but it was a relief to escape the indifference of my father and the recklessness of my stepmother. It was a chaotic transition, but ultimately, life felt more comfortable without them. Years later, I found love with a senior colleague at work, and we eventually got married. We decided against a wedding ceremony to avoid facing my father and stepmother, whose presence I couldn't bear. Instead, I sent my father a photo of me in my wedding dress. Our life together began, and we were happiest planning our future, like building a house or starting a family. In the years since I moved out, I rarely heard from my father, so it was a shock when his name flashed on my phone one day. The voice on the other end introduced himself as one of my father's colleagues and told me my father had collapsed at work and was in the hospital. I rushed to his side immediately. At the hospital, a man in a suit met me at the entrance and led me to my father's room. He lay pale and motionless in the bed, surrounded by tubes. His colleague explained they couldn't reach his wife, my stepmother. It seemed he had tried to contact her as well. Despite multiple attempts, my father's colleague couldn't reach my stepmother. Feeling hesitant to trouble him further, I reluctantly decided to call her myself. However, she didn't answer my calls initially. After about 30 minutes, she finally called back, sounding annoyed at the inconvenience. I informed her about my father's situation and asked when she could come to the hospital. With a groan, she dismissed the urgency and cheerfully stated that she was too busy to come, leaving everything to me. Before I could respond, she hung up abruptly. I tried calling her back immediately, but her phone was off. It seemed she had deliberately switched it off. I had hoped that even though my stepmother had shown her indifference before, she would still come to the hospital when my father collapsed. However, she proved me wrong. She not only failed to visit, but also didn't bother to show any concern for him during his time in the hospital. I took on the responsibility of managing his hospital admissions, daily care, and paperwork, using up my paid leave in the process. Despite our estrangement over the years, I couldn't shake off the worry for my father. I visited him daily, hoping for his recovery, but unfortunately, he never woke up. His passing left me overwhelmed with tasks. I had to handle legal matters, arrange the funeral, and notify acquaintances from his law firm. Although his colleagues were helpful in reaching out to relevant parties, my stepmother remained absent until the day of the funeral. Seeing her shed tears at my father's coffin, after showing no support during his illness, angered me. It felt like the mockery of his memory. In a moment of intense emotion, I couldn't contain myself. I grabbed her arm and pulled her outside, expressing my frustration and anger. I told her to never show her face to me again, fed up with her insincerity and hypocrisy. My stepmother's abrupt halt to her tears was jarring. With a snide remark about my supposed acting, she made her exit, leaving behind a lingering threat. 2 weeks later, after the funeral and the settling of affairs, I returned to my childhood home for the first time in years. My purpose was clear: to begin sorting through my father's belongings in earnest. While I had previously relocated documents pertaining to his work, personal items like clothes and books remained untouched. I didn't expect my stepmother to take an interest in them, so the task fell to me. About an hour into my organizing efforts, my stepmother returned home, bursting into the living room with an air of authority. Her accusatory tone, as if scolding a misbehaving child, didn't sit well with me. I stood my ground, ready to assert myself. As I sorted through my father's things, my stepmother interrupted, claiming ownership of the house and the $1 million inheritance. She offered me a measly $50, which I found absurd and couldn't help but laugh. This seemed to irritate her, and she insisted that she, as my father's wife, had the right to everything. But I challenged her, pointing out that she was only a common law wife and not a legal heir. She froze, realizing her mistake, and tried to argue her case, but I stood my ground. I suggested that she was sloppy in hiding her affairs and avoiding official marriage documents. I refused to let her kick me out, unleashing years of frustration. She tried to argue back, mentioning a will or life insurance policy, but I knew her claims wouldn't hold up. It turned out that my stepmother's claims were baseless. There was no will, and I was the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. Additionally, proving her status as a common law wife would be challenging, especially given her affairs. Despite not being well versed in survivor pensions, it seemed enough to intimidate her. As her hopes crumbled, my stepmother's demeanor grew more serious. With a final ultimatum, I demanded she leave or face police intervention. Frustrated, she hastily packed her belongings and left. Later, I heard rumors about her struggles. Dependent on my father's income, she hadn't worked in years and struggled to find stable employment. Reduced to odd jobs, she now lived day to day. Despite her struggles, my stepmother's selfish nature persisted. She attempted to seek support from old acquaintances, but none were willing to accommodate her. Desperate and lacking funds, she resorted to a shocking move, approaching my husband, claiming her superiority in looks and appeal over me. It was a transparent attempt to stir up trouble, but my husband firmly rejected her advances. Frustrated by her failed attempts to disrupt my family, my stepmother's actions only evoked pity. I swiftly involved the authorities, and she received a stern warning. Hopefully, she learned from this experience. While sorting through my father's belongings, I stumbled upon his diary. Though hesitant to invade his privacy, I couldn't resist the urge to peek. The entries revealed his deep concern for my well-being and future. It became clear that his hard work was driven by a desire to ensure my financial security and happiness. Tucked within the pages was a cherished photo, my young father, my biological mother, and me, all beaming with joy. It was a poignant reminder that I was truly loved by my parents. As I flipped through the diary, another photo caught my eye, a recent one of my father and my stepmother. Despite my confusion about why my father stayed in a common-law relationship with my stepmother, it was evident that he cared for her in his own way. Sadly, her feelings didn't seem to match his. Determined to understand and reciprocate love, I was overjoyed to discover that I was pregnant. Recent visits to the hospital confirmed that our baby is developing well. Looking ahead to our child's future, my husband and I made the decision to move into the house my father left us. Our current apartment doesn't have enough space for a nursery, so we're willing to invest in a suitable home for our growing family. Every decision we make is with our child's best interests at heart. Just as my parents loved me, I am committed to showering this child with love and care. It's a promise I've made to myself. Mom, sis, and grandma are family, so I was expecting each of them to contribute $30,000 as a wedding gift. But sis had the nerve to suggest not inviting grandma to the wedding because accommodating her wheelchair would be too much trouble. I was stunned by what sis said. It gave me a headache. Grandma, whom sis didn't want at the wedding, is like a mother to us. Plus, it's entirely sis's fault that grandma needs a wheelchair. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even think of her as my sister anymore. My name is Jessica. Growing up, my sister Chloe and I had a tough time. Dad was a violent drunk, and Mom always took the brunt of it while trying to protect Chloe and me. It was heartbreaking to see Mom covered in bruises. Dad was like a storm every time he came home, wreaking havoc. Chloe and I spent our childhood huddled in a corner, waiting for the chaos to subside. As you might imagine, our parents eventually divorced. Dad was furious about the divorce, but somehow Mom managed to go through with it. Custody went to Mom, so Chloe and I ended up living in Mom's childhood home, where we began living with Mom, Grandma, and me. Grandma was incredibly kind to us, showering us with love to heal our emotional wounds. Since Mom was working full-time, Grandma took care of most household chores. She cooked our favorite meals, taught us the names of flowers in the garden, and instilled good manners in us. I can't thank Grandma enough for all she did. So, I couldn't understand Chloe's gradual change of heart. Around the time she hit her rebellious phase, Chloe started to change. She often hung out with a bad crowd and stopped studying altogether. Even at home, she'd grumble and tell us to move whenever she passed us in the hallway or on the stairs. Chloe's bad attitude was a constant concern for me, Mom, and Grandma. But things reached a breaking point when Chloe was in college. By then, Chloe regularly came home in the early morning hours, often drunk. It reminded me of the worst of Dad. Then, one day, the incident happened. Chloe came home drunk from a club party. I was already disgusted by her wandering around the house so carelessly when it happened. "Hey, Grandma, you're in the way. Move," Chloe said as Grandma was slowly descending the stairs due to her bad back. Chloe knew this, yet she pushed Grandma from behind, causing her to lose her balance from the sudden shove. While holding onto the handrail, Grandma fell down the stairs, and we had to call an ambulance. Mom and I were furious with Chloe. Pushing an elderly person is just unthinkable. Even with the ambulance arriving, Chloe tried to justify herself, saying she barely touched Grandma and couldn't believe she fell from just that. Grandma ended up fracturing her leg and worsening her already bad back, which resulted in a hospital stay. I visited Grandma daily, encouraging her as she diligently worked through her rehab. Yet Chloe never once came to visit. How could she do this to Grandma, who has always taken care of us? I'd say in rage, to which Grandma would always reply, "It's okay, it's fine," though her smile didn't quite reach her downturned eyebrows, showing she was saddened by Chloe's actions. Grandma worked hard in rehab, but ultimately had to adjust to life in a wheelchair. None of us had ever thought this would happen, and our house was not equipped for it. We made some adjustments, like installing ramps, but it was a challenging transition. Grandma was deeply saddened by her new limitations. While I was in college, I had the time to help Grandma, but it became difficult after I started working. We told Chloe, who was still a student, that she was the reason Grandma was in a wheelchair now, so she should help her when she's home. However, our words fell on deaf ears. While scrolling through her phone, Chloe would respond with a careless "yeah, yeah," and continued her partying and drinking, never assisting Grandma when she needed it. Our patience was wearing thin with Chloe, but the tipping point came when she announced she was getting married and pregnant. She arrogantly apologized for getting married before me, stating she's the beautiful one and marrying up. Chloe started talking about her dream wedding, with a far-off look in her eyes. Apparently, she's planning to have the ceremony sooner rather than later to avoid being visibly pregnant. With her wealthy husband providing ample funds, Chloe boasted about having the wedding of her wildest dreams, wearing a princess-like dress, planning surprises, and going all out with the food. She even had the audacity to tell Mom and me that we should feel grateful for being invited. While I found Chloe's behavior intolerable, she's still my sister. I was genuinely happy for her marriage and pregnancy, but being told to be grateful for an invitation was off-putting. Furthermore, Chloe only mentioned Mom and me, completely omitting Grandma. Unaware of my growing suspicion, Chloe unknowingly answers my unspoken questions. Mom, sis, and Grandma are family, so I'm expecting wedding gifts to be around $30,000. Oh, but don't invite Grandma to the ceremony. It's a hassle to accommodate someone in a wheelchair, you know. I couldn't believe the nerve of my sister, Chloe. I knew she was out of line, but this was just too much. The amount she expected for a wedding gift was outrageous, and most shocking of all, the idea of not inviting Grandma to the wedding was unthinkable to me. Grandma stepped in to take care of us when Mom was swamped at work. She raised us with so much love. To treat Grandma like she's a burden, and to think Chloe was the one who pushed Grandma down the stairs, leading to her being wheelchair-bound. Grandma has been saying how she feels like a burden since then. Chloe's words must have cut her deep. For Grandma, who's often felt down since becoming wheelchair-bound, thinking she's a burden to everyone, Chloe's words would have been tough to hear. Though Grandma said congratulations to Chloe, her usually kind smile was tinged with sadness. I couldn't stand it anymore. A surge of anger bubbled up from within me, an anger that had been simmering ever since Grandma was pushed down the stairs. That was the moment I decided I was done considering Chloe my sister. All right, make sure you get a proper wedding gift. You better wear something nice, or you'll make my fiance's high-profile guests look bad, Chloe said, wheeling out a large suitcase from her room and leaving the house, completely ignoring Mom's angry shouts. I'm so happy to finally get out of this old, dirty house, she said, filled with spite, and left, waving her hand. Mom and Grandma were stunned for a moment, but I was burning with a desire for revenge. I shared my plan with Mom and Grandma, and although they were shaken, after all, Chloe is Mom's daughter and Grandma's granddaughter. If they disagreed, I was going to try to talk them out of it. But they thought about it for a minute and then nodded. We need to set her straight once and for all, Mom said, filled with regret about her parenting. Grandma reassured her, you were an excellent mother. It's my fault Chloe turned out this way, seeing the two of them. So hurt only fueled my determination for revenge even more. Months later, the day of Chloe's wedding arrived. Since it was a day off, I was enjoying a cozy tea time at home with a book. I looked at the clock and noticed that Chloe's wedding had already started. Grandma had even baked cookies to go with the delicious tea, making for a truly serene day off. Just then, both my and Mom's cell phones and the home landline began to ring. Frustrated by the relentless calls, Mom was about to answer the phone, but I stopped her. It's not her battle to fight. It's my revenge as the older sister. Hey sis, why aren't you at the wedding? Mom's not here either. What's going on? None of my friends are here either, so my guest seats are empty. Chloe's teary voice came through the phone. I responded calmly, Do you really think Mom and I would support someone who doesn't appreciate Grandma, who has been so good to us? We all warned you multiple times about your behavior, but you ignored us. So we decided to ignore your requests. We're not coming to the wedding, and we're not sending a gift. You're lying. You told my friends not to come, didn't you? I don't have your friends. If they're not there, doesn't that just show you're not as lep as you thought? Chloe's voice was filled with sorrow, but I had more to say. By the way, we sold Grandma's house and moved. We're not telling you where. What? Why wasn't I informed? We don't want you to come. You've made Grandma's life miserable. I understand that you might see my actions as cruel, but I had to stand up for Grandma, who has been mistreated. Chloe, the one who forced Grandma into a wheelchair is you. Our new home is entirely accessible, and we even designed the kitchen to be easy for Grandma to use. She baked cookies today, and we're enjoying them now in our new home. It's heartless to ask us to come to the wedding now. And as for inviting Dad, that's a terrible idea. We haven't seen Dad since the divorce, and inviting him could only lead to trouble. Dad's drinking problem is as bad as ever, and he caused a scene at the wedding reception. He grabbed the microphone and went on an uninvited rant about how lonely he felt about his daughter's marriage. He even sang a song and tripped while drunk, crashing head first into another table. Chloe's husband, being a CEO, had many business partners at the wedding who were completely disappointed by Dad's actions. Several people even left the wedding, feeling uncomfortable, and unsurprisingly, Chloe's husband and his family were furious. Chloe seemed to be under attack from all sides, but then an even bigger issue emerged. It turns out Chloe wasn't actually pregnant. Chloe, who hadn't been focused on her studies, seemed to think it was okay to later claim she had a miscarriage. She lied to her husband, claiming to be pregnant to elevate her social standing. Her husband became suspicious when Chloe's belly didn't grow, and upon investigating, he quickly uncovered her lie. Between Dad's antics at the wedding and her own dishonesty, Chloe's husband was understandably furious. Divorce is now on the table, and she's even facing demands for financial compensation in the divorce proceedings. Chloe, who had never really worked a day in her life and had almost no savings, found herself in a difficult situation, kicked out of the house by her husband, and with nowhere to go. After hearing Chloe's whole story, I felt sympathy, but when she cried for help, I realized something profound. Chloe and I are not truly sisters anymore. I'm not your sister anymore. I have no intention of helping you. And if Mom and Grandma are swayed by your tears, I'll do everything to stop them from supporting you. Live your own life, Chloe. Why won't you help me with that? I said goodbye and hung up the phone on a crying Chloe. Afterward, I suggested that we didn't really need a landline phone anymore since we all have mobile phones. Both Mom and I have blocked Chloe's number, severing ties with her completely. Rumor has it that Chloe is now leading a life soaked in alcohol, struggling to make payments for the financial compensation demanded in her divorce. Maybe she really did inherit Dad's bad traits. As for me, Mom, and Grandma, the three of us are living peacefully in our accessible home. Grandma can now do many things she couldn't do before. She can cook her favorite meals and do laundry, and she shows a brighter smile, feeling that she contributes to the family. Mom's job is still demanding, but she seems a bit more relaxed now that Chloe, the problematic child, is out of the picture. As for me, without the constant worry about Chloe potentially hurting Grandma, I can focus better on my work. My hard work has been acknowledged, and my superiors see a bright future for me. While taking good care of Mom and Grandma, I'm living my days in happiness.
Things seemed fine as I returned home to grab something I forgot, until I overheard my husband chatting in the living room. He was talking about how everything was going smoothly according to their plan. It shocked me to hear him and my mother-in-law talking about getting rid of me, their daughter-in-law. Despite living together peacefully until then, it was clear they harbored deep hatred towards me. Normally, I might have confronted them, but because of my profession as a police officer, I decided against it. That day marked the beginning of my struggle to expose their evil intentions. My name is Michelle Kimball. I've been married to Dave, who is 3 years older than me, for 3 years now. We met at a traffic safety class held at Dave's workplace back when I was working as a police officer in the traffic department. It was my first traffic safety class, and I was pretty nervous because I'm not great at speaking in front of people. Luckily, Dave helped me out, and we became friends afterward. He started a conversation to help calm my nerves, which I'll always remember. Since we got married, we haven't had any kids yet. I wanted one soon after our wedding, but Dave wasn't too keen on the idea. He kept saying we needed to save more money because raising a child is expensive, even though we both had stable jobs and were financially secure. He avoided talking about having kids, which bothered me a lot. And I wasn't the only one bothered by it. My mother-in-law, Judy, was always worried too. At first, she hoped for a grandchild. But as time went by, she seemed to blame me for not having one. She'd say things like, "Michelle, you're not getting any younger. You should hurry up and have a baby. If a woman can't have her husband's child, she's just like a maid." When I told Dave what Judy said, he'd get upset and defensive, saying things like, "Are you saying this is my fault? I'm tired from work, and you're just making it worse. If you really want a kid, why don't you try harder?" He'd also start criticizing my appearance whenever we talked about it. On top of everything, Dave seems to prefer the flashy fashion of younger girls, which doesn't really suit me as I'm approaching my 30s. I've explained to him many times that I can't dress too extravagantly because my job requires me to be ready for sudden calls. But he just doesn't seem to get it. He thinks a wife who doesn't prioritize her appearance is failing as a woman and tells me to reflect on myself before complaining to him. I regretted marrying him when I realized that the once kind-hearted Dave could have such a nasty attitude. 2 years after we got married, my work schedule changed, and we started spending less and less time together as our days off rarely matched. Even when we planned to do something together, Dave would casually bail on me for other plans, like going fishing with his coworkers. He'd apologize, but his smirk showed he didn't really mean it. It felt like he was always off having fun on his own, while I was left feeling disappointed and betrayed, even on days when I just wanted a quiet day at home. My mother-in-law has a habit of showing up unannounced, always ready with a comment. "Where's Dave?" She'd ask. "Oh, off fishing with some girl," I'd reply. Then she'd make some snide remark about him preferring other company over mine. I hate having to deal with her insensitivity, but I can't just brush her off and leave. So instead, I spend my weekends listening to her comments. "You two don't seem like you're going to have kids," she'd say, pushing her opinions on us. "You should be more proactive. You're the wife, right?" I try to explain that I'm doing my best, but Dave isn't exactly enthusiastic about it due to money concerns. But then she'd pry into my finances, asking how much I earn. I hesitated to tell her, but eventually gave her a slightly lower figure than the truth. She seemed disappointed and made a comparison to some rich person, insinuating that my salary wasn't enough for having a child. I wish she wouldn't compare me, a public servant, to someone wealthy. Something about my mother-in-law's behavior began to unsettle me, and it was just the beginning of a troubling turn of events. From that day on, she started openly harassing me. She began showing up at our house more frequently, sometimes almost half the days of the week. Once, I returned home from work to find her there, having let herself in with a spare key, and she was blatantly cooking dinner. She'd make snide comments about me prioritizing work over home, even though I'm not a housewife, and suggest that women without children have it easy. Her remarks made me feel sick, and there were times when she'd rudely wake me up after I'd worked a night shift, criticizing me for sleeping in. She'd imply that if I slept late due to my job, I wasn't fulfilling my duties as a wife, and it's no wonder men look for other women. Despite my protests, she forced me to eat breakfast. It was all becoming too much to bear. Gradually, everything I ate started to lose its flavor, sometimes even tasting bitter. This went on for over a month, and with the stress and lack of sleep, I became so fatigued that even eating at home resulted in a rush to the bathroom. Instead of showing concern, Dave made it clear that he was annoyed by my weary face. "You look so downcast all the time. It brings me down too. You've handed all the housework over to Mom. At least try to look cheerful," he'd say. My mother-in-law would come in and nitpick whenever I was too busy to do the housework, which Dave seemed to notice. But despite my attempts to communicate, Dave would just ignore me and watch TV. He wouldn't listen to me, but he'd laugh at trivial celebrity gossip on TV, which only added to my frustration. Dave, you've stopped making eye contact and talking to me recently. You even started canceling plans with me on your days off. Are you having an affair? I finally confronted him. His reaction was explosive. An affair? What an accusation, he yelled back. I have work obligations. It's easy for you to say without knowing the hardships. Or are you feeling this way because you're the one having an affair? His face turned red with anger, leaving me speechless and shocked by his outburst. Moreover, Dave lashed out and smashed a vase that was on the table, scattering shards all the way to my feet. That's way too much, even for you, I said, feeling scared of my husband for the first time. From then on, incidents like that kept happening, leaving me restless even when I was at home. One day, due to work circumstances, I had to be away from home for a few days. On the day of my business trip, I left the house but realized I had forgotten my important planner at the front door. I rushed back home to retrieve it, but I felt awkward about facing Dave again after our recent fight over his comment about my trip. When I returned home, I quietly opened the front door and saw Judy's shoes. Not wanting to encounter my mother-in-law, I gently picked up my planner from the shoe cabinet and was about to leave when I overheard their conversation. We've got everything we need. Everything's going as planned. Shall we push Daisy soon? Yeah, but the effects are not showing up as expected. She's been rushing to the toilet after every meal. It should be soon, right? I couldn't believe my ears at their chilling talk. What on earth were they planning? Quickly, I grabbed the voice recorder I always carry and started recording, unaware that they were being recorded. The two in the room were cheerfully discussing their outrageous plan. Maybe we should increase the life insurance payout. That should be enough to pay off Mom's debt, right? That would help, and you wouldn't have to see her ugly face every day, one of them said. I was so shocked I caught my breath. I couldn't believe they were planning such things, even if they didn't like me. Furthermore, I heard them laughing disdainfully, saying even if we tell the cops, the traffic cop won't suspect a thing. Gradually, anger overwhelmed my sadness, and I vowed to take revenge on them. During the business trip, I spent time pondering how to get back at my husband. Perhaps due to my gloomy demeanor, my colleagues expressed their concern, and I ended up venting to them. That's when I heard an unexpected piece of information from one of them. Apparently, a little while ago, there was a call about a drunk causing a ruckus in a gentleman's club. When they rushed to the scene, the man causing the disturbance was none other than Dave. Dave's behavior at the club was shocking, especially since he was someone who attended our wedding, and they immediately recognized him. He claimed the woman he was with was his girlfriend and threatened anyone who touched her. He caused a scene by holding one of the female employees tightly, kicking tables, and causing a ruckus. It was clear that it wasn't just a drunken declaration. They were genuinely in a relationship. Suddenly, all of my husband's past actions made sense. Surprisingly, I didn't get much shock. Rather, I felt energized to thoroughly investigate my husband's infidelity. Watch out, I thought. I won't let this go as it is. A week later, my husband started speaking to me in a gentle tone, similar to when we first started dating. Suspicious of his sudden change, he presented me with a document. Michelle, you always have such a dangerous job with the police, and that's amazing. I'm proud as a husband, but I can't help but worry. As I looked at the application form for life insurance that Dave handed me, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still planning to go through with their scheme. Despite my doubts, I wanted to believe in Dave one last time. Do you really think I'm at risk of being targeted? Would you worry about me? I asked him, looking straight into his eyes. Please reconsider, I pleaded. But to my dismay, my husband nodded with a broad smile. Of course. That's why you should sign this application form quickly, he insisted. I couldn't help but wonder if all he saw in me now was the life insurance payout he would get in exchange for my life. He truly seemed like a good-for-nothing man to the core. But strangely, thanks to him, I felt empowered to carry out my retribution without hesitation. Well, in this world, you never know who might come after you, he remarked. There are so many dangerous incidents these days. For example, having a family member with a foolish idea. His words sent a chill down my spine. Like planning to get rid of a nuisance wife to be with a young mistress, I added, seeing his discomfort as his eyes darted nervously around. He seemed to realize he'd been caught. Being instigated by a debt-ridden mother to send the daughter-in-law to the afterlife with a large life insurance policy, I continued, watching his expression change. Wait a minute, are you? He started. But I cut him off, playing the recording from the voice recorder. Out came my mother-in-law's conversation and crude laughter, grotesquely destroying my husband's face. How did you get this recording? He demanded, shocked. I happened to overhear it, I replied calmly. It was a good thing I was carrying a voice recorder. If I'd always been a traffic cop, I wouldn't carry one around. Huh? Aren't you still in the traffic department? Dave asked, seemingly surprised. I'm in the detective division now. I told you, didn't I? Well, I guess you weren't listening since you were too preoccupied with a certain woman, I retorted. I confronted my husband Dave with photos of his affair that he had hidden in his room. These were undeniable pieces of evidence I found while rummaging through our house when he wasn't around. What? I don't know anything about these photos. I don't even know this woman, Dave insisted. Oh, really? She seems to be a girl working in a high-end nightclub. You don't know her. The club where you got drunk and caused a scene, apparently shouting that she was your woman. How charming. How much do you even know? I confronted him. Cornered, Dave desperately began to make excuses, not caring about appearances anymore. It's all my mom's fault. After she heard about me dating the nightclub girl, she started saying that I should marry her instead of you, who earns less. She was the one who tempted me, he explained. Dave's words made sense to me. When my mother-in-law, Judy, heard about my salary and called it low, she must have been comparing it to Dave's mistress. According to the conversations I recorded with a voice recorder, Judy had a substantial amount of debt. It was foolish to think that they were planning to use my life insurance payout and the nightclub girl's income to pay off that debt. So you're saying the plan came from your mom? I asked, seeking clarification. Yes, so I'm not to blame, Dave replied. What are you talking about? The whole thing started because you had an affair in the first place. It's despicable to blame others. I'll never forgive you, I yelled, my anger boiling over. Suddenly, Dave let out an incomprehensible scream and grabbed my collar. Reacting quickly, I grabbed his hand and threw him onto the floor. I'm a police officer, Dave. I'm used to dealing with violent men like you. I can protect myself without life insurance, I asserted, standing strong in front of Dave, who was groaning in pain from hitting his back. With a firm hand, I took out my handcuffs. You're under arrest, I declared. Dave's eyes widened in disbelief. That's a joke, right? He stammered. Seeing his reaction, Dave suddenly became weak and started apologizing. I'm sorry, it was just a moment of weakness. Please forgive me, he pleaded. Save your excuses for the police station. I'll listen to them thoroughly when the time comes, I responded sternly. Eventually, Dave and Judy were imprisoned for their plot to make me an outcast. I divorced Dave and sued both him and his mistress for $20,000 in emotional damages. While they might be released soon as it was an attempted crime, Dave losing his job and having to pay the emotional damages along with Judy's debt means they will undoubtedly face a tough life ahead. Meanwhile, I'm thoroughly enjoying living alone for the first time in years. Having been forced to live a cramped life for so long, I decided to spread my wings for a while.
Hey, are you kidding me? Why is Mom eating those? That's what my husband said to me on the phone. He had been away for work for 5 years. Our relationship hadn't been great, and when we did talk, we often argued. Suddenly, he came back to the house where my mother-in-law and I lived. He sent me homemade cookies, but my mother-in-law started eating them without asking. When I told my husband, he panicked. Then my mother-in-law collapsed. I rushed her to the emergency room, where I found out the truth. I called the police. My name is Eleanor. I'm 35, and I work at a nail salon. I met my husband Daniel on a blind date organized by my colleagues. I wasn't keen on dating, but they tricked me into going. It turned out to be a good thing because that's where I met Daniel. He works in real estate like me. We bonded over our love for cooking. Even though I'm good at cooking, his dishes amazed me. I suggested he should do it professionally, but he said he preferred keeping it as a hobby. We exchanged numbers and made plans to meet again. A few days later, I got invited to Daniel's house. I was a bit nervous when I arrived, but there was a huge feast on the table. It looked amazing and tasted delicious. I got so caught up in enjoying the food that I noticed Daniel looking at me happily. After we finished eating, he confessed his feelings to me, and we decided to start dating. We dated for 3 years, during which he cooked delicious meals for me. I gained a bit of weight because of all the good food, but I also learned how to cook better thanks to him. We traveled to many places together, searching for more tasty dishes. During those 3 years, we never had any big fights. My work was going well, and I felt truly happy with him. On my birthday, at the end of those 3 years, he proposed to me. I cried when I saw the sparkling ring because I knew I wanted to spend every day with him. I was filled with happiness. Meeting my in-laws and the wedding ceremony went smoothly. Both of them are gentle and kind, just like Daniel. They welcomed me warmly, treating me like their own daughter. They've been married for 30 years and are very close, which makes me want to have a strong bond with Daniel as we grow old together. Unfortunately, we won't see them often because they live far away from us. Life with my husband was going smoothly. He often prepared meals for me, and coming home to a feast always lifted my spirits after a long day at work. His cooking seemed to erase all the fatigue from my day, and he would watch me happily as I ate, just like when we first started dating. After 3 years of marriage, our happy days took a sad turn. My father-in-law suddenly passed away after collapsing at work. Both my husband and I struggled to come to terms with the loss, but it hit my mother-in-law the hardest. They were very close, so her grief was understandable. I didn't know what to say to comfort her when I saw her crying in the hospital, and even after the funeral, she remained exhausted. She eventually quit her job, unable to cope with the loss. We tried to support her by visiting often, but she didn't seem to improve. Each time I saw her, I wondered how I could help her feel better. Then one day, my husband suggested that his mother come live with us. I was surprised by the idea, but I understood that he was her only family and she needed support. Although I wished he had discussed it with me beforehand, I agreed. When his mother asked if I was okay with it, I reassured her with a smile. Living together seemed to brighten her spirits more than anything else had in a long time. To be honest, I was a bit nervous about living with my mother-in-law because I hadn't anticipated it. However, she's a calm and gentle person, so I hoped things would remain as peaceful as when it was just my husband and me. At first, I didn't think much about us moving in together, but soon after we started living together, I realized I had been naive. A few days in, my mother-in-law welcomed me home and mentioned she had done some chores, like hanging out the laundry. I thanked her politely and went to check the laundry, only to find that she had washed clothes I had set aside for hand washing. They had shrunk and the colors had run onto my other clothes. I was shocked because those were my favorite items. I wondered if she hadn't noticed when she hung them out to dry, but I realized I hadn't explained it to her either. So softly, I told her not to wash the clothes I planned to hand wash next time. However, she didn't respond, and I regretted bringing it up. Despite my requests, she kept putting the hand wash items in the washing machine repeatedly. Sometimes, my wet clothes were left in the machine, and clothes I meant to wash ended up in the trash. After 2 weeks of this, I felt like I was being harassed. Whenever I politely warned her, she either ignored me or gave insincere apologies. It felt like a never-ending cycle. I tried washing my items at night and asking her to stay out of my room, but the small harassments continued. When I talked to my husband about it, he couldn't believe it and dismissed it as a misunderstanding. He wished it was just a mistake, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I felt incredibly frustrated with my husband for not believing me. Then, one day, my mother-in-law mentioned she had cleaned the house. When I checked the trash, I found my practice nail tools, which I had been using since vocational school, thrown away. These tools were precious to me, and seeing them discarded made me lose my temper. I yelled at my mother-in-law, asking her not to throw away my tools and to be more considerate with the laundry, accusing her of deliberately trying to harass me. She defended herself, saying she only threw them away because they were dirty and she seemed oblivious to any wrongdoing. Her casual dismissal infuriated me further, especially when she called my beloved nail tools dirty. I kept shouting until my husband suddenly appeared behind me. He was shocked and asked what was going on. My mother-in-law quickly painted me as the aggressor, claiming I was saying untrue things about her. When I tried to defend myself, my husband sided with her, implying that I was overreacting and shouldn't be upset with her, especially knowing she wasn't well. I was deeply upset that my husband didn't listen to me and sided with my mother-in-law. Despite my tears and protests, her harassment continued, and our arguments became more frequent. Our relationship deteriorated, and he stopped cooking for us like he used to. I often wished we could go back to the happier times before we moved in with her. The only relief was that she didn't harass me when my husband was home. But one day, he dropped a bombshell. He was being transferred to a new place alone. I was shocked and asked why, but he said he had already decided and thought I would object if he told me earlier. He seemed indifferent to how I felt and brushed off my concerns about living with his mother. I pleaded for him not to leave, but he insisted on his decision, even shouting at me to accept it. He left for his new job alone, leaving me to face life with my mother-in-law, which turned into a living hell. In addition to the harassment over laundry and cleaning, my favorite dishes and clothes were thrown away, and my packages were opened without my permission. The situation worsened day by day, and my husband rarely came home. When he did, it was to accuse me of bullying his mother based on her complaints. I would deny the accusations, leading to fights both at home with my mother-in-law and on the phone with my husband. I was exhausted from the constant conflict. Work became my only respite, and I was grateful to have a job. About a year into living with my mother-in-law, I returned home from work to find her eating cookies. I ignored her and started preparing dinner when my husband called. Although I assumed it was about my mother-in-law again, I answered. To my surprise, he asked if I enjoyed the homemade cookies he made. It then hit me that it was Valentine's Day, a day he never acknowledged before. He never came home on my birthday or our anniversary, nor did he ever send gifts. I realized the cookies my mother-in-law was enjoying were the ones my husband had made. She had opened my package and helped herself without permission. When I coldly informed him of this, he seemed shocked. As we argued over the phone, there was a sudden loud noise behind us, and my mother-in-law collapsed. I hung up hastily, unable to understand what had just happened. My mother-in-law looked distressed and began convulsing, so I called an ambulance. She was rushed to the hospital and received emergency treatment, thankfully avoiding serious injury. However, the doctor's words shocked me. She may have eaten poisonous mushrooms. I couldn't fathom how poisonous mushrooms could end up in cookies, but it was the only explanation I could think of. I informed the doctor and called the police. They arrived promptly and discovered the poisonous mushrooms in the cookies my husband had sent me. I couldn't comprehend why my husband would do such a thing. His happiness when he asked if I had eaten the cookies now seemed suspicious. Frustrated and upset, I informed the police of his whereabouts and returned to the hospital. When my mother-in-law woke up, I told her about the poisonous mushrooms. She began to cry and apologized, admitting her envy of my happiness led her to mistreat me. She explained that my husband had instructed her to feed me the poisoned cookies as punishment for her badmouthing me. She expressed remorse and acknowledged my husband's extreme actions. Despite her attempts to dissuade him, he dismissed it as harmless, believing it would only cause a slight stomachache. I couldn't believe what my mother-in-law revealed. The cookies were meant to be the reason I would ask for a divorce. She thought she was only causing me a stomachache. She even considered eating them herself to protect her son from criminal charges if anything happened to me. Her story left me trembling. This wasn't something that could be resolved with just an apology. She was complicit, and I couldn't bear to see her face again. I told her as much, despite her continuous apologies. On my way home, I received a call from the police informing me that my husband had been arrested. That was the final straw. I quickly packed my belongings and returned to my parents' house, needing to distance myself from the chaos and betrayal. After my husband's release, I asked him to proceed with the divorce papers through my lawyer, and eventually, the divorce was finalized, with me receiving alimony. Shockingly, my lawyer revealed that my husband had been having an affair before he moved out. It was with a colleague at work, And apparently, the strained relationship between my mother-in-law and me contributed to it. Learning this made me realize how I had endured years of turmoil, hoping my husband would return to his former self. If I had known the truth, I would have sought a divorce much sooner. I never imagined that something as innocent as his cooking would lead to such trouble. Following his release, my husband lost his job due to the arrest and the rumors of his affair within the company. The woman he had the affair with also lost her job. Now he lives with his mother, struggling financially due to his criminal record and debts from the affair. Ironically, my mother-in-law now harasses him as she did me, giving him a taste of what I went through. It took me a while to recover from the shock, but with the support of my family, I found the strength to move forward. I decided to fulfill my long-time dream of opening a home-based nail salon using my alimony and savings. The day of the salon's opening was filled with congratulations from my former colleagues, and I felt immense joy seeing my dream come true. Now, working as a nail artist brings me happiness, and I'm grateful for the busy schedule and the smiles of my satisfied customers. Despite the hardships, I found peace and fulfillment in doing what I love. I'm a 33-year-old office worker, and my husband Tony is 5 years older. We've been married for 7 years, but currently I'm living with my mother due to some circumstances. You might wonder how I ended up in this situation. Well, let's go back a few years. Tony and I decided to build a house together. At that time, Tony had just switched jobs, and we didn't have much money saved up. His previous job at a big company was tough on him. He faced harassment from his boss, which made him lose sleep and eventually become unable to work. He tried taking a break and seeing a psychiatrist, but it didn't help much, so he had to quit. For a while, we managed on my income alone. After 2 months of being unemployed, Tony started feeling better. He ate and slept well again, and his psychiatrist was pleased with his progress. It was a relief to see him back to his old self. He started looking for a new job, but it wasn't easy because of his previous resignation due to mental health issues. Eventually, he found a job at a smaller company, although it paid less than his previous one. Still, he was happy to be working again, and it was in a field he liked. We wanted to have kids, but with the uncertainty of Tony's job situation and our financial stability, we decided to put that on hold. Then, a new challenge arose. My mother, Karen, had a traffic accident and became paralyzed, needing to use a wheelchair. Since my dad passed away when I was in middle school, Karen had been living alone in our old family home, which wasn't suitable for her condition. Tony suggested we all live together, which surprised both me and my mom, but I appreciated his kindness. Despite Tony's recent job change, we decided to apply for a mortgage to buy a house suitable for all of us. It was tough to get approved because Tony hadn't been at his new job for long. But we didn't give up. We kept trying, and eventually, after exploring different options, we succeeded in getting the loan approved. We finally decided to buy our own home. It's been a dream of mine to live in a cozy place, with wooden beams on the ceiling, custom storage, and a kitchen that fits my height perfectly. We wanted a spacious, wheelchair-friendly, single-story house, and we were excited for it to be finished. We visited the construction site often, eagerly awaiting its completion. When it was done, we were thrilled. The house even had a big yard where my mom, who's been feeling hesitant to go out since her accident, could enjoy the sun. But there was one problem. The land where we built our house was a gift from Tony's grandfather, who loved him dearly. Sadly, he got diagnosed with cancer, and he decided to divide his assets among his family. Tony got the biggest plot of land, but it was just a short walk from his family's home. When we told them my mom would be moving in with us, Tony's sister and mother weren't happy. They made hurtful comments, saying awful things about me and my mom. But Tony stood up for us, saying it was his grandfather's wish for us to have the land. Tony's family can be really mean sometimes, but Tony himself is kind-hearted. He always says he learned from their bad behavior. To me, he's like a beautiful flower growing from mud. Tony's grandfather also gave land to Tony's sister, although smaller, but it came with a parking lot that brings in good income. I would have preferred that, but I'm grateful for what we received. Thanks to Tony's grandfather, we could build our house without worrying about the land cost. It made a huge difference when getting a loan. After the house was finished, we invited Tommy's family over. During construction, we found out that Tommy's family had been visiting the house without our permission. They showed up late, with no apology, claiming it was kind of like their house too because of Tony's grandfather's connection. They even walked in with muddy shoes, ignoring the slippers we provided. The atmosphere was tense from the start, and they came empty-handed. They toured the rooms, and when they saw my mom's spacious room, my mother-in-law declared she wanted to live there. Then she made insensitive comments to my mom about her accident, implying it was a stroke of luck to move from her old place to our nice house. I was furious, but before I could say anything, Tommy spoke up. He called out their rude behavior, demanding an apology. Instead of apologizing, they turned on us, accusing Tony of being arrogant for standing up to them. They even insulted me, calling me a jinx. Tommy didn't back down. He firmly confronted them, refusing to tolerate their disrespect. They looked frustrated, but Tommy stood his ground. As the tense situation unfolded, my mother, who had been silently observing, apologized with a regretful expression. She explained that she's living with us because of an accident she had, and she genuinely appreciated Tony's kindness. Feeling guilty, Tony's mother and sister left, shooting us nasty looks. Later, my mom apologized to Tony for upsetting his family, expressing regret for the incident during the housewarming party. Tony, being the compassionate person he is, apologized back, acknowledging their lack of decency. Despite the rough start, my mom felt grateful to be living with us. 4 months passed, and we started settling into our new home. My mom began to smile more, and our neighbors, who knew Tommy since childhood, were kind to us. But then, I received a call at work. Tony had collapsed at work. Rushing to the hospital, I hoped for the best. But the sight of Tony hooked up to tubes shattered me. The doctor's grim prognosis left me numb. Despite my prayers, Tony didn't make it. He passed away suddenly. In my state of shock, my mother and sister-in-law showed up, hurling accusations at me. They insinuated that I had something to do with Tony's death, calling me a jinx like my mom. I was too devastated to respond. My mom arrived distraught, and seeing her tears finally allowed me to cry too. Amidst our grief, Tony's mother declared she never wanted to see us again, blaming me for her son's death. With heavy hearts, we arranged Tony's funeral, mourning the loss of a beloved husband and son. We went to the funeral home, still in disbelief over Tony's sudden death from a subarachnoid hemorrhage. He had seemed perfectly fine that morning. When I informed my mother-in-law about the funeral schedule, she surprised me by saying she wouldn't attend because Tony always sided with us. She also mentioned her daughter wouldn't come either. At the viewing, many of Tony's colleagues and friends showed up, but neither my mother nor my sister-in-law and her husband were there. It was shocking, but it seemed to fit their character. Still, many people attended the funeral, showing how much Tony was loved. It was comforting to spend time with those who genuinely missed him. After Tony's death, I received an inappropriate email from my mother-in-law, asking about the life insurance money. I ignored it, unable to deal with such matters. When we returned home, we noticed a light on in the house, despite us turning everything off before leaving. Entering cautiously, we found my sister-in-law and her husband there, claiming they were taking over the house. They had sold our belongings and replaced them with their own, considering our things bad luck since Tony had used them. Their callousness stunned us. They even casually mentioned selling our belongings and seemed unfazed by our shock and anger. My mom and I were speechless, unable to comprehend their audacity. I called the resale company, explaining the situation, and they agreed to treat the items as stolen and return them. After this betrayal, I wanted nothing to do with Tony's family anymore. As I grappled with my emotions about staying in the house filled with memories of Tony, my mother whispered to me, asking what Tony would say. Perhaps he'd suggest we leave, He always valued spending time with those who understood us and saw dealing with certain people as a waste of time. Realizing that Tony's family would likely continue interfering if we stayed, I impulsively leased an accessible apartment. I made a deal with my mother and sister-in-law to cut ties with us in exchange for moving out. Thus, a new chapter began with just my mother and me in the apartment. Tony had multiple life insurance policies, which now provided us financial security. He had always joked about leaving us wealthy when he passed away, and he made good on that promise. Since I had bought the house under my name due to Tony's inability to secure a mortgage, it was safe from repossession. However, when 3 months passed without paying the mortgage, I started receiving furious calls from Jessica and Linda, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. They were furious that the house was being sold, as they had been living there. They had to move out, and Linda even sold her own house due to gambling problems. Despite their pleas for money and reconciliation, I decided to cut ties with them completely. With the help of a lawyer, the house was sold without much trouble, providing us with a moment of relief. With the money Tony left us, my mother and I plan to find a new, smaller home where we can prioritize security and start afresh. We settled on a condominium with minimal noise disturbance, ready to move forward with our lives without the chaos and toxicity of Tony's family. I remembered something Tony always said when we were building our home, that people can draw energy from the sun. With that in mind, he created a spacious courtyard for my mother-in-law to enjoy her hobby of reading in the garden without feeling self-conscious. So when looking for a new place, I searched for a condo with a large balcony where she could enjoy her coffee and her books. Although our new condo is smaller than our previous home, it still has enough space for the furniture Tony carefully chose. With the money from selling the house, I was able to buy a luxurious condominium with top-notch security, which would surely put Tony's worrying mind at ease. Meanwhile, rumors about my in-laws' situation started circulating among our old neighbors. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family were left homeless, even trying to borrow money from neighbors with no success. Eventually, they ended up in public housing but continued to face troubles due to their stubbornness. They caused disturbances in the neighborhood, like having loud arguments and even having a barbecue on their small balcony, which shocked the locals. My sister-in-law's husband had left a while ago, leaving her and Linda, my mother-in-law, to live together in a noisy environment. In contrast, my mother and I enjoyed a peaceful life in our new home. Despite both being two-member households, the neighbors rallied together to try to get my in-laws evicted due to their disruptive behavior. It's a clear example that causing trouble won't win you any favor anywhere. I just want to live peacefully and quietly, away from the embarrassment of my estranged family. I believe Tony is watching over us. So from now on, I'll live my life without causing trouble to others and strive to live not just for myself, but also for Tony's memory. My name is Avery, and at 62, I find myself in a new chapter of life. Once a dedicated housewife, I now navigate a more modest existence following the sudden passing of my husband 2 years ago. Left with the responsibility of managing the finances he left behind, I've adjusted to solitude. My 2 sons now grown and married. When my eldest Henry tied the knot, he and his wife, Rhea, extended a generous offer to share their home with me. Grateful for their concern yet adamant about maintaining my independence, I politely declined. But Henry's insistence was unwavering, citing his reluctance to leave me alone. And so, against my initial reservations, we became housemates. Rhea, a mere 23 years old, entered my life as my daughter-in-law. Though her youth initially concerned me, I trusted Henry's judgment. Upon our decision to cohabit, I sought reassurance from Henry regarding Rhea's feelings. His affirmation of her kindness and willingness to help around the house put my mind at ease. Yet, amidst our shared living arrangement, a minor incident brought forth a twinge of concern. Needing assistance with household tasks one day, I approached Rhea while I embarked on errands. However, preoccupied with her phone, she declined, citing business. Though unaccustomed to such reluctance, I chose to remain silent, preferring to maintain harmony over confrontation. That particular day, witnessing Rhea engrossed in her game, I mustered a firmer tone, requesting her assistance with chores before indulging in leisure. With evident annoyance, she grumbled about constant nagging and suggested a fair share of responsibilities among us. Despite her reluctance, she begrudgingly attended to the laundry, shooting me a glare that caught me off guard. Opting against escalating the tension, I left the house as it stood. Following that altercation, Rhea's attitude took a turn for the worse, manifesting in daily acts of disregard. Her discontent extended to my cooking, prompting her to urge Henry for dining out, leaving me behind. Though Henry attempted to mediate, reminding Rhea of my efforts, his allegiance often swayed with her mood, leaving me with apologies rather than resolutions. Requests for assistance with household chores were met with criticism instead of cooperation, further compounded by Rhea's belief in my supposed idleness. Despite my contributions to Henry's expenses and managing the apartment, I found myself unjustly labeled as dependent. Rhea's perception of superiority, stemming from her role as Henry's provider, clouded any recognition of my financial contributions. An ordinary act like vacuuming became a source of contention when Rhea berated me for noise, venting her frustrations to an unseen listener. Feeling exasperated, I confided in Henry upon his return, highlighting my frustration with Rhea's lack of involvement in household duties and her unjust criticism. I stressed the importance of sharing household responsibilities, especially when complaints arose, as I couldn't manage everything alone. While Henry apologized and promised to address the issue with Rhea, his response left me feeling uncertain about the seriousness of the matter. Nevertheless, I opted to wait, hoping for a change without further confrontation. However, 6 months passed, and Rhea's attitude remained unchanged, leaving me utterly exhausted from shouldering the burden of household duties alone, despite my efforts to accommodate her. Around that time, Lucas brought up my upcoming birthday, suggesting an early celebration since my eldest son and his wife would likely be occupied on the actual day. Renly, Lucas's wife, had a thoughtful present for me, and they graciously invited me to dinner at their place, a short journey away. Despite our infrequent meetings, Renly's kindness made the invitation all the more special, and I eagerly accepted. After preparing dinner for Henry and Rhea, I joined Lucas and his family for the celebration. They had arranged for us to dine at my favorite restaurant and presented me with flowers and a gift bag, making it a truly delightful evening. Overwhelmed with happiness, I couldn't help but express how rejuvenating the experience was, remarking, "Ah, this is so healing. I haven't felt this happy in a long time." Lucas, sensing a hint of sadness beneath my words, gently inquired if everything was all right with Henry. Although I hadn't intended to burden them with my troubles, I found solace in confiding in them about my struggles. How I bore the brunt of household chores due to Rhea's reluctance to help and endured her harsh words. After a heartfelt discussion with Renly, Lucas reassured me that I didn't have to endure such hardships, reminding me of the financial stability provided by the stocks and apartment rents left by my husband. He reiterated that my living arrangement with Henry was solely his choice and offered their home as a refuge if I ever felt lonely or overwhelmed. Overwhelmed with gratitude for the support of my family, I resolved to persevere a little longer, knowing I had allies by my side. Expressing my heartfelt appreciation, I assured them, "Thank you, but I'll put in a bit more effort. They're my precious family." Returning home that evening, I noticed the dishes they had used still sitting in the sink. With a resigned sigh, I considered taking care of them myself, but opted to leave them for Henry and Rhea to address in the morning. The following day, while preparing breakfast, I politely asked Rhea to wash the dishes she had used the previous day. However, she disregarded my request, engrossed in her phone on the couch. Unable to contain my frustration at Rhea's dismissive attitude, I raised my voice, reminding her of the basic courtesy of cleaning up after oneself. In response, Rhea shifted the responsibility onto me, citing the adage, "He who does not work neither shall he eat." Henry, overhearing our exchange, appeared puzzled and sought clarification. I explained that I had simply requested Rhea to attend to the dishes they had used. Despite Henry's attempts to intervene and help, Rhea insisted that it was my duty, dismissing my efforts and labeling me a burden. Frustration bubbling to the surface, I couldn't suppress my emotions any longer, expressing the overwhelming strain of shouldering all household responsibilities, including Henry's share. Henry, realizing the gravity of the situation, apologized and offered assistance, but Rhea adamantly rejected his help, exacerbating the tension by demanding that I vacate the apartment. Reaching my breaking point, I questioned Rhea's assertion, asserting my right to remain in my own home. Turning to Henry, I laid bare my true sentiments, imploring him to understand the untenable situation. Rhea may be misunderstanding something, but you grasp the truth, don't you, Henry? The ones who must leave are you too. I cannot endure this living arrangement any longer. Having reached my limit, I made my stance clear. Rhea, visibly taken aback, questioned my statement, unable to comprehend how a supposedly jobless mother-in-law could afford a residence. Patiently, I clarified that I am not a tenant. Rather, I am the landlord of this very apartment. Through diligent management of the assets left by Henry's father, including stocks, properties, and land, I sustained myself independently, without relying on Henry's financial support. Even after we began living together, I shouldered the majority of utility and grocery expenses. Rhea's shock was palpable as she turned to Henry for confirmation. Further elaborating, I highlighted the impracticality of Henry single-handedly managing both her desires and the complexities of my life. I emphasized that despite his best intentions, his income alone couldn't sustain such demands. It was evident that Rhea grasped the gravity of the situation as her face drained of color, prompting hurried apologies. They both expressed remorse in a flurry of apologies, acknowledging their ignorance and the hurtful nature of their words. While acknowledging our familial bond and their remorse, I made it clear that continuing to live together was untenable. I proposed that they seek a separate residence, allowing us to address this issue while maintaining our relationship. Henry, fraught with concern about leaving me alone, pledged to assist with household chores moving forward. However, I reassured him of my well-being, mentioning Lucas and his family's offer to provide support if needed. Initially, I had entertained the notion of persevering a little longer, but the current situation had made it abundantly clear that a change was imperative. I explained to Henry my decision to reside closer to Lucas and his family, a choice he eventually accepted with understanding. Rhea, however, resorted to accusatory tones, blaming me for what she perceived as abandonment. Recognizing the futility of further discourse, I chose silence, understanding that some sentiments are better left unchallenged. Within a month of our discussion, Henry and Rhea secured a new residence and relocated. However, constrained by rental costs, their options were limited to an aging, compact apartment. Rhea, unaccustomed to employment, began a part-time job to supplement their finances, albeit with visible strain. Henry confided in me, revealing the constant friction plaguing their domestic life as Rhea struggled to balance work and household responsibilities. Henry himself appeared weary, drained by the incessant conflicts. Despite their departure, Henry persisted in his pleas for reconciliation, expressing a desire to resume cohabitation with me. However, I remained resolute, having no intention of revisiting the tumultuous dynamics of our previous arrangement. Following their departure, I found solace in residing with Lucas and his family. Despite my insistence that they needn't inconvenience themselves, Lucas insisted that my presence enriched their lives. He revealed his mother's earnest desire to learn from me, particularly in the culinary arts, which ultimately led to our decision to live together. Since then, Lucas and his family have made it abundantly clear that my comfort and happiness are their utmost priorities. They've encouraged open communication, assuring me that any grievances will be addressed promptly and without hesitation. Together, we've fostered an environment of mutual respect and consideration, ensuring that we do not impose on each other unnecessarily. My days are now filled with joy as I cook alongside Renly and indulge in my hobbies, relishing in the fulfillment of each moment. Presently, I find myself content and at peace, determined to safeguard this newfound happiness moving forward. As I look to the future, my sole aspiration is to continue living in a manner that nurtures and preserves this profound sense of joy and contentment. Hi, I'm Amanda, and I'm 28 years old. I've been married to my husband Tom for 2 years now. We met in college and have been together since then. Tom works in a corporate job, while I decided not to go the traditional route and instead make money by investing in stocks and trading foreign currencies. Even though we're comfortable financially, my parents keep telling me to get a regular job. But Tom understands my choice and supports me. He's always been the person I can talk to about anything since we met in college. My family, on the other hand, doesn't really get my lifestyle, so we don't see each other as much. When we visited Tom's family to tell them about our marriage, they were curious about my job. Tom defended me, saying I was doing what I loved, but his brother Jeff kept pushing. When I finally told Jeff I was a part-timer, he made a snarky comment about how lots of college grads can't find stable jobs these days. It was frustrating dealing with his condescending attitude. I didn't let Jeff's comments get to me because marrying him was never part of the deal. Despite Tom's apologies for his brother's behavior, having Tom's support was what mattered most to me. Jeff, who often looked down on me, apparently holds a position as an associate professor at a university. I feel sorry for his students. Now Jeff is getting married, and Tom and I have been invited to the wedding. The bride-to-be is the daughter of the university president where Jeff works. With such a prestigious connection, Jeff's future seems secure. When Jeff saw me at the wedding, he started mocking me again, calling it embarrassing to have a part-timer like me as his sister-in-law. He even pointed out that my name wasn't listed in the wedding directory. I didn't understand what he meant at first, but when I checked, my name was the only one missing. Tom was ready to confront Jeff, but I told him not to bother. I didn't care about such things. Jeff smirked at my response and suggested that I, as a part-timer, should keep a low profile and not serve drinks at the wedding. He seemed to think it would cause trouble if people found out about my job. He even went as far as telling us not to serve drinks to avoid any awkward questions. With a smug attitude, he left us behind. Tom was still fuming with anger. "I'm sorry my brother has been incredibly rude," he apologized, his expression full of regret. Feeling guilty, I found myself apologizing too. I should be the one saying sorry. I didn't mean for you to be upset because of me. Seeing me apologize, Tom finally managed to smile. But at the wedding, neither of us had the heart to celebrate. Instead, we followed Jeff's suggestion and just enjoyed the delicious food. As expected from a wedding of the university president's daughter, the food was extravagant, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. However, when we opened the gifts at home, we were stunned. Inside was a bowl with a portrait of Jeff and his wife. Even Tom, usually the more composed brother, was exasperated. "This is the last thing we need. I don't want to see my brother's face," he sighed. "But we can't just throw it away, and it's not something we can use." But I immediately thought of a solution. The bowl was the perfect size and depth for our cat's dish. "Can we use it for the cat's food? Would that be disrespectful to your brother?" I asked Tom. He replied with laughter, "It's perfect for the cat's food. The idea of my brother and his wife being licked by the cat every day is refreshing." With Tom's approval, the gift bowl became our cat's dish. A month later, I had to make a few visits to the university where Jeff worked. I dreaded running into him, especially since he had joined the university after marrying the president's daughter. However, I thought it'd be safe since the campus was vast, and I had to visit a different department from where he worked. But my luck ran out, as I bumped into Jeff right away. When he saw me, he looked surprised. I quickly looked away and pretended not to notice him, hoping to avoid any confrontation. But Jeff approached me and started questioning. "Why the hell are you here?" "I'm calling the police for trespassing." His loud voice attracted a crowd of students. He began mocking me, asking if I had come to the university just to eat cheap lunch at the cafeteria. Feeling shy and embarrassed, I fell silent. But Jeff seemed to find my silence amusing and continued to ridicule me, telling the surrounding students that I was just a part-timer who hadn't achieved much after college. I could feel the students giggling, and I felt like crying. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, a familiar professor intervened from behind. I felt relieved to see them. "What on earth is happening?" they asked. "She's my invited guest, my brother-in-law," they declared. Jeff was momentarily taken aback by the unexpected defense, but he quickly retorted, "Isn't there some kind of mistake? This girl is just a part-timer." Another professor, who arrived late and knew me, corrected Jeff, saying, "She is not a part-timer. She's a research collaborator in the economics department." Despite the other professor's attempt to clarify, Jeff remained unconvinced. Ever since marrying the president's daughter, he had become increasingly condescending, even towards senior professors. Sensing the futility of arguing with Jeff, the professor who had invited me took my hand and guided me away from the situation. As we left, the students dispersed, but Jeff seemed intent on following me. Ignoring the presence of senior professors in the room, Jeff barged in and continued his verbal attack, calling me derogatory names and questioning why I was wandering around the university. His offensive words caused the senior professors to panic, and one of them quickly ushered Jeff out of the room. However, I overheard him whispering to Tom that his career was over. Jeff's disregard for the consequences of his actions seemed apparent. With the president's support, he appeared to have no fear. But at that moment, the president entered the room. He immediately apologized to me, expressing deep regret for Jeff's behavior, and the other professors followed suit. In response, I calmly stated that I didn't mind, though inside I was seething with anger. Despite not planning to meet with the president that day, it seemed he had come for some reason. Unexpectedly, I've been collaborating on research with the professors in the economics department of this university. We're verifying the theory I use in my stock and forex investment operations. Ever since my university days, I've been conducting financial transactions based on my unique theory. A professor I connected with on social media noticed my successful investment performance and began verifying it with me. As a result, I started being invited to the university as a research collaborator. The university has even suggested that I work as a lecturer. But public speaking isn't my strong suit, so it's not an option for me. Since participating in the research also benefits my investments, I visit the university a few times a month to confirm the results. It wasn't until Jeff's wedding that I realized it was the same university where he works. When I looked at the guest list and recognized a name, I discovered that the president of the university was the bride's father. Despite other university-related guests being present, it seemed that no one noticed me. My name had been removed from the list, and I had been instructed not to serve drinks, so I stayed in my seat throughout the event. With such a grand wedding, nobody was expected to pay attention to someone as inconspicuous as me. The reason the president and professors were in a panic when Jeff confronted me is because I'm a major donor to the university. Since I started collaborating on research, my investment performance has significantly improved, and I've been donating a substantial amount of money each year. In addition to my research at the university, the theories I'm working on are also being shared with hedge funds and investors abroad. This has led to a significant increase in donations, as well as sponsorship funds crucial for the university's operations. The university earns a considerable amount of money from the research I'm involved in, making donations and sponsorships vital. The incident with my brother-in-law, Jeff, at the university was a serious matter. If I had reacted angrily to his rude remarks and decided to withdraw from the research or cease donations, it would have had a significant impact on the university's operations. That day, discussing investment theory became secondary as the president and other professors were solely focused on apologizing to me. As I was leaving, I took the opportunity to inform the president that the associate professor he mentioned earlier, who happened to be my brother-in-law Jeff, had insulted me. It seemed that nobody had realized this connection before, and it surprised them. I also expressed my honest feelings about Jeff's behavior, acknowledging that his attitude was questionable, especially for an educator. Despite feeling angry, I spoke passionately in front of about 10 people, including the president, something I wouldn't normally do due to nerves. Looking back, I feel embarrassed yet impressed with myself for reacting in an unexpected manner when pushed too far. After I left, it became apparent that Jeff's attitude had become an issue within the university. He was criticized for his arrogant behavior towards his superiors, even after marrying the president's daughter, and his reputation among students was tarnished. Some saw his appointment as an associate professor as a special case due to his relationship with the president's daughter, leading to criticism directed at the president as well. The president had been defending Jeff, his son-in-law, out of love for his daughter, but he faced trouble himself if his position was compromised due to the criticism directed at Jeff. However, Jeff, unaware that even the president, his biggest supporter, was receiving criticism for defending him, became increasingly arrogant. When I returned to the university, Jeff, as usual, mocked me. His derogatory remarks made me question the integrity of the university, considering that such behavior was tolerated from an associate professor. I began contemplating ending the joint research with the university. Being ridiculed every time I visited felt like a waste of time. As Jeff continued his insults, seemingly oblivious to my absent-mindedness, the president intervened with a louder voice, reprimanding Jeff for his foolishness. Seeing Jeff, usually so overbearing, silenced by the president's words, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Jeff's glare at me was short-lived as the president's stern command followed. After today, you're no longer part of this university. Pack up and leave immediately. Jeff appeared to struggle to grasp the gravity of the situation, his gaze fixed blankly on the president's face. Suddenly, his tone shifted to casual, addressing the president as father-in-law and expressing confusion about the sudden turn of events. In response, the president, his face flushed with anger, yelled once more, denying Jeff's right to call him father-in-law and demanding that Jeff divorce his daughter. The mention of divorce caught me off guard. Just then, a young woman and a man in a suit appeared before us. Recognizing the woman, I felt a sense of familiarity. As she spoke, Jeff's shock was evident. It became clear that the woman was Jeff's wife, but her presence at the university was a mystery. With a stern expression, Jeff's wife began to explain her suspicions and how a lawyer had obtained incriminating photos. The man accompanying her then showed Jeff the photos, revealing him arm in arm with another woman I didn't recognize. Jeff's surprise mirrored my own astonishment. Understanding why the president mentioned divorce, I felt it was inappropriate to discuss such matters in the middle of the university, especially in front of me. Despite this, Jeff's wife insisted on the divorce, accusing Jeff of using her and never truly loving her. The unfolding drama left my heart racing with anticipation. Seeing Jeff on the verge of tears brought me a sense of satisfaction, especially when his wife mentioned property division, prompting Jeff to beg for forgiveness, promising not to cheat again. Witnessing Jeff's panic was oddly enjoyable, and I even considered taking a picture to show my husband. Perhaps the president had called me to witness Jeff's suffering. Despite Jeff's pleas, his wife remained firm, stating she had already hired a lawyer. I hadn't anticipated things moving so swiftly. As I watched Jeff, bewildered and frustrated, he redirected his anger towards me, insulting me for being just a part-timer and telling me to leave. At this point, the president stepped in to defend me, highlighting my contributions as a skilled investor, my joint research with the economics department, and my generous donations to the university. Finally, Jeff seemed to absorb the president's words as he silently looked at me. Seizing the opportunity, I confronted Jeff, demanding an apology from him too. Reluctantly, Jeff apologized to me, perhaps under the pressure of the president's intervention. It seemed that the president had orchestrated the entire event to weaken Jeff, showing evidence of his affair, discussing my achievements to further diminish him, and ultimately compelling an apology. Thanks to the president's plan, I felt a sense of relief seeing Jeff apologize to me. As the lawyer explained the details of the property division, I said my farewells to Bob, ready to leave. He requested my continued support for the university, but I asked for a rain check. My trust in the university had waned due to Jeff, and I had personal matters to attend to. I promised to get back to him and left for the day. When I arrived home, I recounted the incident with Jeff to my husband Tom. He was already aware of my dislike for Jeff, so hearing about his apology and despair brought genuine joy to Tom's face. However, he expressed frustration at not being able to witness Jeff's state firsthand and jokingly scolded me for not taking a picture. Amidst our laughter, I shared another piece of good news with Tom. I was pregnant. Tom's ecstatic reaction made it clear how much it meant to him. I had been feeling unwell lately and had suspected the reason on my way home from the university. The news filled our home with joy and anticipation for the future. I went to the doctor's office and learned about the pregnancy. Although I felt a bit guilty for Bob, who had gone to great lengths to make Jeff apologize, I decided to pause my cooperation with the university for now. Bob seemed disappointed, but he said he would wait until I finished raising the child. When I mentioned reconsidering later, Bob told me that Jeff, who had divorced officially, was now unemployed and struggling to find a new job. Jeff had been trying to get hired by other universities, but his reputation for arrogance was holding him back, and he wasn't receiving any offers. It seemed that Jeff's arrogance had backfired on him, leading to a bigger downfall than expected. Suddenly, I realized that the photos we had used as cat dishes had disappeared. Whether it was because they were cheap gifts or because of the divorce, the couple's photos were gone too. I'm a 33-year-old single mom with a 5-year-old daughter. My husband cheated on me while I was pregnant, so we separated after I gave birth. I kicked him out of my life and moved back in with my parents. 2 days ago, I came home from work to find my younger sister, Eva, who's 29, sitting there with a big pregnant belly. She and her husband had moved to Croatia after they got married. Surprisingly, I felt happy about her being pregnant, even though she's always been mean to me. For some reason, she never liked me and thought she was better than me. She used to manipulate our parents against me, and because she's younger, she often got away with it. Despite being younger, she's bigger and stronger than me. Despite my petite and lean physique, if my sister, Eva, grabbed my wrist, I couldn't break free. Even though it was evident to anyone that I couldn't physically overpower her, my parents never believed me when I told them she had beaten me. They dismiss it, saying she's my younger sister. How could she possibly harm me? So, I kept my distance from her, only speaking when necessary. Fortunately, I got the chance to move out for high school, which was a relief from her presence. Now that monster is back in my life, and seeing her pregnant, I assumed she was here for her postpartum period. When I asked Mom how long she was planning to stay, Ava overheard and shouted from the living room that she's here to stay, questioning if I had a problem with that. She hasn't changed one bit, still as narcissistic as ever. Mom explained that Eva's husband got a transfer back to the States, and since Eva is pregnant, they believe staying with our parents is best for her. They can take care of her during pregnancy and after childbirth. When I asked Mom if she had time to take care of her, she timidly replied that she had to. Eva is still young, and they think she can't raise her child alone. I was speechless, really. Eva is 29 and can't handle raising her child alone. I was 27 when I had my baby, and I managed my postpartum period alone because my husband was busy. Even my mom didn't come to help. She said it was something I needed to learn as a mother. Now, with her golden child pregnant, my mom is ready to step in as a nanny, such a hypocrite. Their favoritism has always been clear, which is why I've kept my distance. When I separated from my husband, I rented a house instead of moving in with my parents. But Dad insisted I live with them, saying their house was too big for just the two of them, and they could watch over my daughter while I worked. He suggested I pay rent to them instead of to someone else, which seemed fair, especially since I was dealing with so much emotional turmoil. Pregnancy, postpartum struggles, my husband's infidelity, and divorce. I moved in with them, not facing any major issues except that the promised support to watch over my daughter faltered. Mom only agreed to babysit a few times. Most of the time, I had to hire a nanny. She claimed she couldn't babysit full-time, so I needed to find someone else to help. While Mom could oversee the nanny's work, she seemed more interested in being a baby monitor herself. Quite ironic, if you ask me. Despite the circumstances, I figured having Mom around was better than leaving my daughter with a stranger. So I hired a full-time nanny as well. It's disheartening to see Mom fussing over my sister, providing her with food, meds, and supplements. She never did any of that for me during my 9 months of pregnancy. She barely visited me, and only once after I gave birth. Ever since I learned that Eva is staying permanently, I've had this gut feeling that something's up. How could they agree to let her move in for good? Our house isn't that big. I'm happy to move out. But my daughter is too young to be left alone without supervision. Even though Mom doesn't exclusively babysit her, it feels safer having her around. If I moved out, I'd always need a babysitter at home, and I'm not sure how safe it is to leave my kid with a stranger. I know I might come off as a clingy mom, but hey, I'm a single mother, and my daughter is my whole world. I might be overly protective, but what else can I do? She's my everything. Update 1. I'm so grateful for all the advice. It really helped calm my nerves. Unfortunately, my worst fears came true just 2 days after my last post. When I came home from work, I found all my belongings packed and placed on the front porch, with my daughter sitting quietly next to them. She looked so scared and upset. When I asked her who did this, she said it was Anne, and she had made her sit there for hours. I immediately asked where Grandma and Grandpa were, but my daughter didn't say anything. She just hugged me tightly, clearly terrified of Aunt Eva. I asked if Eva had hurt her or shouted at her, and she sobbed, saying that Eva was yelling things she didn't understand and was thrashing around all my belongings, which made her feel threatened. Furious, I stormed inside to confront Eva. She had the audacity to threaten me, saying something about messing with a pregnant woman and threatening to call the cops on me for harassment. I shot back, telling her I could call the cops on her for harassing my daughter while I was away. She just laughed and said I didn't have any evidence, claiming Mom was there when she packed my stuff. It became clear that Mom was on her side, and talking to Eva was futile. I called out for Mom, but there was no response. She had locked herself in her room. It became evident that they were all ganged up against me, with Eva's evil laugh confirming it. She looked at me with a smirk, reveling in my helplessness, and said, "Take a hint, you dumbass. No one wants you here. We packed for you to make it easier. Can't you see I'm pregnant and need space? Me and my child are staying here now. Get your lazy butt moving." Refusing to back down, I retorted, "I'm not going anywhere. I don't live here for free like you. I pay rent." But before I could say more, she charged at me, reminiscent of our childhood clashes. She mocked me, asking if I had a receipt or lease paper to prove it. I didn't, and she seized on that, calling me a loser and saying that's why my husband found solace in another woman's bed, because I'm useless. Realizing there was no point in arguing further, especially in front of my terrified daughter, I loaded my car with our belongings and left. There was nothing left to discuss. My parents had shown their true colors, spineless in front of Eva. It dawned on me that Eva wasn't lying about Mom being there. She had helped pack my stuff. There's no way Eva, 7 months pregnant, could have managed it alone. They were all in this together. It's baffling that Eva, with her husband's decent job, is adamant on making my life miserable when they could easily afford their own place. Instead, she chased me out, leaving her husband to live alone in their company-provided flat while she stays here to hassle me. I can't fathom what I did to deserve this treatment from her, especially when my own parents won't stand up for me. I had to check into a hotel for a week and scramble to find a new place to live. House hunting in such a short time frame felt impossible, especially with work and taking care of my daughter. No one wants a flatmate with a baby, but I managed to persuade a colleague who was looking for one. I assured her that my daughter wouldn't be a bother, and I'd leave as soon as I found a permanent place. Thankfully, she was understanding and let us stay. It's been 2 weeks living with my colleague, and I've finally found a place within my budget and close to both my workplace and my daughter's daycare. However, the existing tenant won't vacate for another month. It's been almost 3 weeks since I was forced to move out, and I've already made the bookings for our new place. However, my daughter is still shaken with fear, constantly worried that Aunt Eva will come after us and hurt us. It breaks my heart to see her like this. She struggles to describe exactly what Eva did to her, but she cries and says that Aunt Eva yelled at her, stared at her with wide eyes, and threatened to hit her if she cried. She still sobs and wets her bed out of fear of Eva. I feel utterly helpless seeing my daughter suffer like this. I can't even begin to imagine how scared and unsafe she must have felt that day. It's infuriating to think that Eva, who is about to become a mother herself, lacks any empathy for a child's fear. I'll never forgive her for what she's done. And if I ever get the chance, I swear I'll make her pay for it. Update 2. I've been waiting for an opportunity, and it finally came. As I mentioned, for the past year, I've been paying rent to live at my parents' house. Dad asked for an extra $5,000 on top of the rent, promising to return it later. I agreed, thinking I was helping him out. Little did I know, he was using my rent money and that extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage. Now that I've moved out, I didn't pay the rent with that extra amount. On the 10th of this month, Dad called me in a panic, asking why I hadn't transferred the money. I couldn't help but laugh. He was so confident that I'd continue paying the rent even after being kicked out that he didn't bother checking his account balance or keeping emergency funds. I told him, hello, I no longer live at your house. Your golden child kicked me out, remember? So why should I pay the rent? He was silent for a moment and then admitted that he didn't make enough money to pay the mortgage. He said his store's sales had dwindled, and whatever little he made went towards household expenses. He confessed that he had been using my rent money and the extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage. I responded firmly, that's not my problem. I don't owe you anything. I paid for my stay and bought my own food. Ask your narcissistic daughter to help you out. I'm sure she would. With that, I hung up. Within an hour, Mom called me, saying Dad was struggling to pay the mortgage, and instead of helping him, I was hanging up on him. She reminded me of how they stood by me when my husband left me, saying this was how I was repaying them. She urged me to swallow my pride and transfer the money I'd been sending every month. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I replied, do you even hear yourself? You let me live in your house because I paid rent, and you used it for a mortgage. Whenever I needed help with my daughter, I hired a babysitter. You didn't pitch in. What kind of support are you talking about? It's clear my mom realized I wasn't going to tolerate being pushed around like I used to as a child. Now I know how to stand up for myself. She tried to justify Eva's actions, saying she needed more space because she's pregnant, but I wasn't having it. I reminded her that Eva didn't request me to move out. She threw me out, and they all chose to turn a blind eye to it. I made it clear that I could never forgive them for allowing Eva to harm my daughter. Mom then tried to defend Eva, saying she's immature and I should overlook her behavior because I'm older and wiser. But it was clear to me that it was all about the money. I refused to be manipulated any longer. I told them I wouldn't give them a penny, and they stopped bothering me after that. It's been a month since then, and I think they're managing the mortgage on their own or with Eva's help. Honestly, I don't care what's going on in their lives anymore. I'm happy in my cozy little home with my daughter. I've hired a nanny who takes care of her after preschool. The nanny is a middle-aged woman with a son who's 5 years older than my daughter. They get along great and have a wonderful time together. It feels amazing to come home to a happy and loving daughter. Life does get better. We just need to hang in there. Update 3. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude for all the love and support. It truly means a lot to me, and I apologize for not updating this thread frequently. There were two main reasons for this. Firstly, I've severed all ties with my parents and narcissistic sister, so there wasn't much relevant to share. Secondly, life has been busy. I got promoted this year, which comes with added responsibilities but also extra pay, and I've been caught up with work and motherly duties. But I have an interesting update to share this time. Last week, my mom and dad showed up at my workplace. They didn't know where I lived, so they came to me as a last resort. I was too busy to meet them, so I instructed the security to ask them to leave. However, they seemed unwilling to go and were arguing with security. They looked frail and as if they had aged at least 10 years. To my surprise, my mom was carrying an infant in her arms, which I assumed was Eva's child. Intrigued, I went out to meet them. Upon seeing me, they started sobbing. They came to me desperate for help to save their house. Dad explained that he hadn't been able to pay the mortgage for the past 7 to 8 months. He used up all their savings to cover the initial 2 to 3 months after I left, but they kept defaulting. Last month, the bank finally kicked them out, and their house was put up for sale. Since then, they've been living in a dingy apartment. They pleaded with me to help them save their house. I listened patiently and then asked why their entitled daughter hadn't helped them. They hung their heads in shame and revealed that Eva's husband had kicked her out after discovering she was cheating on him, and the baby wasn't his. All the stories about transfers and company accommodations were lies. Her husband was still in Croatia, and they're getting a divorce. I was shocked to hear this. Even after all that, my parents continued to support her. Mom tearfully admitted they didn't know about Eva's situation. She had claimed she was here for the delivery but disappeared after I moved out, and they only asked her for help with the mortgage then. When the truth came out, I was initially speechless. But then, I couldn't hold back my emotions and hugged my mom, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't help but point out that their support for Eva was evident by the fact that my mom was holding Eva's child in her arms. They explained they couldn't leave Eva in such a dire situation. They had used up all their savings to cover her medical bills. I fell silent, contemplating what to do next. Without overthinking, I asked where Eva was. Mom mumbled something, but Dad gave her a look and said Eva was at home, refusing to go to work. Mom interjected, saying it was because she couldn't leave the baby. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. I reminded Mom that mothers all over the world go back to work when their babies are 6 months old, and Eva should have done the same, especially given her circumstances. They continued pleading for help, but I explained that I didn't have enough money to save their house. Dad suggested that if I could pay for the defaulted months, he could request the manager to stop the sale, and we could continue with the remaining payments monthly. I had to be honest and say I didn't have that kind of money. I had used up my savings to pay the deposit for my house lease and for my daughter's elementary school admission. Mom didn't take my response well, making faces in disappointment. I gently reminded her that I'm a single mom, solely responsible for myself and my daughter, and my resources were limited. Feeling low after my parents left, I confided in my manager when she noticed my absence from my desk for over an hour. She suggested a solution: to buy the house myself, given my recent promotion and raise. After all the years of helping with the mortgage and now trying to save the house, it seemed like a fair deal. In return, I'd allow my parents to continue living there, but without Eva. I called Dad and offered to pay off the piled-up mortgage and the remaining payments if they transferred the house to my name. Dad said he needed to discuss it with Mom and would let me know. I told him to take his time, unsure if they had enough. A week passed, and they didn't call me back. It seemed like their silence was their answer. They didn't agree with my proposal. They were okay with their house being sold and living in a dingy apartment, as long as they didn't have to let go of Eva and live comfortably. Driving home from work, I thought of passing by their house to see if the sale sign was up, but I decided against it. I made the decision to cut them out of my life a year ago, and I would stick to it. I don't want them back in my life. I'm happy and content living with my daughter, watching her grow and achieve new milestones. She's now in elementary school, and I couldn't be prouder. This lady isn't helpful anymore because she's sick. They're saying I won't be useful for cleaning the house. They talked about it when they thought I was asleep. My mother-in-law and husband decided to separate from me before things got worse. So while I was in the hospital, my husband divorced me. They left the house. But then they came back a few months later. They caused chaos when they found out the truth. My name is Sarah. I'm 31, and I've been dating Jack for 5 years. We were living with her parents, planning to buy our own house once we had a child. But it's been almost 2 years, and we still don't have a child. We're still living with her parents, along with my husband, his mother, and his younger brother. I became the center of attention because of this situation. My parents, who live far away and need flights to visit, always regretted not being able to help me. However, my husband has always been very caring towards me and had a good relationship with my mother-in-law. We were far from the typical conflicts between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law. It seemed like those issues didn't apply to us. Everything changed when I had an accident and broke a bone. I was hospitalized and couldn't move on my own in the first few days after the accident. My husband and mother-in-law visited me daily, showing great concern. But now they only come once a week. I appreciated the visits, but everything changed after the doctor mentioned I could have permanent consequences. They didn't realize I was listening when they said, "She won't be able to do the housework anymore or anything like that. And it's still going to end up costing more than a wife who is no good for anything. She already has problems getting pregnant, so having children is even more unlikely now. Maybe it's even a good thing we don't have children. If she becomes permanently bedridden, I'll be the one who has to take care of everything at home. I didn't get married for this. It wasn't to do all the housework and take care of someone like that. If she hadn't suffered that accident, she could have continued being our domestic worker. What a frustration. If this becomes a bigger problem, it's better to get rid of her. You can leave. I'm going to divorce her as quickly as possible." They had this conversation at the foot of my hospital bed, thinking I was asleep. I came to the realization that to them, I was more than just an employee or caretaker. After this understanding, both my husband and mother-in-law started treating me with open coldness. My husband's visits became rare. He probably wouldn't even be around if we had a son. With time, his visits diminished even more, not even once a week. My mother-in-law's visits were sporadic, filled with unpleasant remarks whenever she did show up. On the bright side, my brother-in-law was incredibly supportive. He handled the laundry and checked on me regularly. He visited almost every day and even took me outside in my wheelchair when I felt suffocated by the long hospital stay. I often felt worn out from the physical therapy, and there were times when I wanted to give up. But I believe I've made it this far largely thanks to my brother-in-law. His presence has been crucial to my physical recovery. The therapy is going well, but it's still hard to tell if I'll have any permanent issues. When I shared news of my progress with my husband and mother-in-law, I overheard discouraging comments. "We should have gotten rid of her sooner," my husband remarked. Their reaction sparked an argument in front of me, showing their unawareness of the impact of their words. However, amidst their heated exchange, my brother-in-law defended me. He reminded them of the care I had provided for our house and father-in-law over the past 5 years. It all started when I began dating my husband, and they suggested we move in together to save money before marriage. They assured me it wouldn't infringe on our privacy or require rent payment, as long as I helped care for my father-in-law during the day while my mother-in-law worked part-time. So my brother-in-law and I teamed up to take care of my father-in-law at home. They shared a close bond, especially over his hobby of collecting antique furniture. He even owned a separate house dedicated to his collection, and my brother-in-law and I always enjoyed hearing about it. My father-in-law cherished his son Alex and cherished the time they spent together. Over time, his health declined, and despite years of care, he sadly passed away. After his father's death, my husband proposed to me, thanking me for always taking good care of him. "Let's continue together. Let's get married," he said. Despite all my efforts and dedication to household care, when I became unable to move, my husband and mother-in-law treated me as if I was useless. When I finally regained mobility, I was furious and demanded resolution. My husband then proposed a solution. He offered me the house in exchange for settling our debts. He suggested dividing the property again. I was unsure if he would actually give me the house, but considering my father-in-law's considerable inheritance, which was divided between my mother-in-law, Sonia, and Alex, it seemed feasible. The inheritance amounted to approximately $20 million for each of us. Jack commissioned Alex to handle all the paperwork with the executor, which proved to be quite bothersome. They debated whether to donate the house as part of the division of property. My husband argued that it was just a big, impractical house in the countryside and suggested it wouldn't be a significant loss even considering its maximum value. He estimated it was worth about $1 million, plus various taxes that would be deducted upon selling. However, Jack was concerned about potential future demands from me and the spread of rumors in the neighborhood if they appeared to abandon me. They discussed what to do with me, and Jack suggested that Alex should take responsibility for me, his brother. But my husband questioned Alex's sudden interest, accusing him of becoming interested in me. Jack dismissed the idea, stating that I was no longer useful to them and shouldn't be asked to take both me and the house. "It's fine. I'll be back later," Jack said dismissively, adding, "Just hope you won't come asking for money later. Remember what I told you. I can't return damaged goods." Jack and Alex signed papers and arranged for the formal transfer of ownership through a lawyer. "I'll take some money from my savings," I responded. "Why don't you find a healthier, prettier, younger woman to marry and build a better house with?" Jack suggested to my husband. "Okay," my husband agreed. "Sarah, call a lawyer to start the divorce process." They quickly announced they would stay in a hotel for a while and left the room. Alex and I bid them goodbye silently. With Alex's help, I filed for divorce, and within a few days, Jack and I became complete strangers. A week later, Jack and my mother-in-law packed their belongings and left home. It was surprising that Alex, my brother-in-law, continued visiting. "Don't worry about it. I'm visiting because I want to," he assured me. We took care of each other and did housework together. We've talked more in these 7 years than you ever did with my brother. We're friends. His kind smile comforted me, and all I could do was express my gratitude. A month later, I was discharged from the hospital. Though I still needed physiotherapy, I felt relieved to be home after so long. "Do you think they'll really come back?" I asked Alex, worried they might return and make me work again. "If they come back, I'll push them away. I can't forgive them for treating you so badly. Besides, they have no right to return to this house," Alex reassured me. Since I couldn't move like before, Alex took care of most domestic tasks. Luckily, as a freelancer, I could work from home and contribute financially. With bi-weekly physiotherapy, I recovered smoothly, without any complications. A year later, I was back to living as before, collaborating with Alex on household tasks. We even synchronized our days off to travel together. Just when I thought our peaceful days would continue, a storm hit suddenly one night. While Alex and I were having dinner, the door was knocked repeatedly, and the intercom rang nervously. Sonia's voice came through, demanding to be let in. I hesitantly opened the door, and Jack entered without hesitation, demanding food. I refused to serve her, asking why she was here. She claimed she had spent all her money and was going to live here again. As my ex-husband approached me with disgusting familiarity, I felt a surge of revulsion. "That's why I divorced you." "I don't care about you anymore," I snapped back. Jack then began insulting me just as her mother arrived. They both started acting as if they owned the place, making themselves at home. I threatened to call the police, but Jack argued that since the house was originally in her father's name, any agreements made were null and void. She demanded half of our savings, but I was shocked to hear that she had squandered everything on frivolous spending and investments I had no knowledge of. She even had debts amounting to $2,000. I refused to give her any money and called the police while Alex handled the situation calmly. It was astounding how bold Jack had become in just a year. Jack and her mother started wreaking havoc in the house, destroying precious furniture that held sentimental value for me. They laughed while causing the destruction, completely ignoring my pleas to stop. About 10 minutes later, when the police arrived, I explained the situation to them. "This is a disaster. Let's hear your side of the story," one of the officers said. "What's wrong with breaking things in my own house?" Jack retorted. "We're just getting rid of stuff we don't need. What's the problem?" Alex intervened, revealing that the house was actually in my name. "This house never belonged to these two. It's in Sarah's name," he explained. "What nonsense are you talking about? Before he died, our father-in-law left a will through a lawyer. He left everything to Alex," Sonia's mother chimed in. Upon hearing this, Jack and her mother were shocked. "So this isn't her property," Jack realized. "But wait, I'm her ex-husband. We're like family, so she has to forgive me," Sonia's ex-husband pleaded. "Don't make me laugh. You're a stranger now that you're an ex. I didn't even know you were in contact with another woman before our divorce was final. And you treated me like an employee," I countered. Jack tried to shift the blame onto her mother, claiming she influenced her actions. However, her mother revealed Sonia's failed attempts at relationships and business ventures, which left her in debt. Despite their previous condescending attitudes towards me, they both desperately pleaded for forgiveness, trying to avoid involving the police. "I won't forgive any of you. You were treating me like a servant until just now. Not leaving when I asked you to leave is illegal. And since the furniture collected by my late father-in-law is now mine, you'll need to compensate for that," I asserted. Jack and her mother begged me not to involve the police, fearing the consequences. "Wouldn't you want me to go to jail?" Jack asked. "I don't care. We're already divorced," I replied, unmoved by their pleas. I discovered that I was married to my brother-in-law, Alex, or rather, he was my ex-brother-in-law. And now he's my husband. Not even a year ago. And you've already moved on to another man, my own brother no less, Jack explained. But Alex clarified, "It's not like that. I wouldn't give Sarah up, no matter how many times I asked her to." Jack was left speechless, unable to argue further. "I don't care anymore. I'm going to pay whatever it takes for the damages," my mother-in-law declared. When asked about the value of the furniture, I estimated it to be around $200,000. Despite their lack of interest, Jack and her mother were now responsible for compensating for the items they had broken. As they couldn't afford such compensation, the police took them away for trespassing and vandalism. I forgave them and moved forward with the process. Jack and her mother sought help from Alex, but he bluntly rejected them, stating, "I'm ashamed to be blood relatives with you." As for the house, my father-in-law had left instructions for me to sell it and use the money as I wished. Alex revealed that the house's actual value was around $500,000, much higher than what we had initially thought. While we planned to sell the land eventually, for now, we decided to take it easy at home, as per my father-in-law's wishes. Concerned about having children, I went for a checkup with a gynecologist after marrying Alex. Fortunately, there were no problems detected with either of us. Now that the troublemakers were gone, Alex and I are happily living together.